They thought her silence meant weakness. They thought her patience meant fear. So they pushed harder, mocked louder, and exposed themselves piece by piece, never realizing the quiet woman they were humiliating was studying every move they made.
Have you ever known a bully so arrogant they practically oozed smugness? That was Staff Sergeant Ryan Hollis, to a T. He stood there in the middle of the obstacle course, a smirk plastered on his face, his voice booming over the 35 soldiers wilting in the Georgia heat. The new girl thinks she's something special, he announced to the whole platoon. I'll give her 10 minutes before she's boo-hooing for her mommy. It was one of those mornings where the sun felt like it had a personal score to settle with you. If you've ever watched someone get picked on just for being quiet, you know exactly where this is headed. And if you believe that what goes around comes around, do me a favor and hit that like button, because you are going to love this ending. 20 feet away, Corporal Kate Brennan didn't even flinch. She was a new transfer, only a month on base, a quiet woman who just did her job and kept to herself. To everyone else, she was basically just part of the background. But to a blowhard like Hollis, her silence was like a red flag to a bull. "Hey, Brennan, you hard of hearing?" he shouted, stomping over to her. "Need a head start?" I mean, this course was made for real soldiers. A few of his buddies snickered. His number one follower, Corporal Draven, even gave the guy next to him a little nudge. But Kate, she just stood there, her face as empty as a blank page. Without a single word, she started to roll up her sleeves. First the right, then the left, each move slow and deliberate. As the camouflage fabric gathered at her elbows, the whole group saw it. Her forearms were covered in a network of old, faded scars. But that's not what made everyone's jaw drop. It was the ink. Her entire left forearm was covered by a massive tattoo of a bald eagle, its wings spread wide in mid-flight. And clutched in its talons was what looked like a long string of letters and numbers. This wasn't some cheap tattoo parlor job. This was a work of art, the kind that costs a fortune and tells a serious story. Hollis's condescending grin just got wider. Well, well, what do we have here?" he sneered, pointing a thumb at her arm for everyone to see. "Check it out, everybody. The new girl got herself some tough girl ink. Isn't that adorable? Where'd you get that?" "Out of a cereal box." The laughter from his crew got louder this time. Draven thought it was so hilarious, he actually pulled out his phone to snap a picture. For the first time, a tiny muscle twitched in Kate's jaw. She ignored them all, turning her focus to the thick rope hanging in front of her. But the way she grabbed it, it was different. It wasn't the clumsy grip of a rookie. Her hands wrapped around that rope with a familiar confidence that just screamed muscle memory. All the way across the training field, Master Sergeant Dale Jackson, a 52-year-old veteran who had seen it all, paused what he was doing. He'd been watching the whole spectacle. But something about Kate's grip on that rope, combined with that very specific eagle tattoo, made his eyes narrow in thought. That design, that string of code, it triggered a distant memory of a top-secret briefing and a file so classified it technically didn't even exist. He started walking slowly toward the group, a look of sudden understanding spreading across his face. Kate took a slow, measured breath. In for 4 seconds, hold for 4, out for 4. It was a tactical breathing exercise meant for extreme focus, but Hollis was too busy running his mouth to notice. For real, Brennan, that tattoo is hideous. It looks like a chicken had a nervous breakdown on your arm. Finally, Kate let go of the rope and turned to face him directly. She just stared, her silence somehow louder and more powerful than any comeback. Thinking he'd finally gotten to her, Hollis scoffed. "What's the problem? You forget how to talk?" Then, in one smooth, powerful motion, she turned back to the rope and started climbing. Now, to pass the rope climb, you need to do it in 30 seconds. If you're really good, you might hit 25. Kate slammed the bell at the top in 22 seconds flat. She moved like a machine, no wasted energy, just raw, efficient power. On the way down, she didn't just slide. She walked her hands down with perfect form, landing on her feet without making a sound. The entire training yard went dead silent. Then, Hollis started a slow, sarcastic clap. "Wow, would you look at that? Beginner's luck, everybody. Let's see if she can do it twice." A couple of soldiers looked away uncomfortably, but nobody dared to speak. But Master Sergeant Jackson knew exactly what he had just seen. That wasn't your standard army training. That grip, that breathing pattern, that was straight out of the Seer School playbook. Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. That was the kind of training only special operations forces went through. And people who graduate from that program don't just become quiet administrative clerks. While Hollis tried to get the platoon's attention back, Kate calmly walked to the water cooler, took a long drink, and pulled out a small, beaten-up notebook, scribbling a few notes like nothing had just happened. Hollis was clearly rattled. His sidekick, Draven, tried to bail him out. "What are you writing in your little diary, Brennan?" "Dear Diary, a big mean sergeant was mean to me today." Kate just clicked her pen shut, put the notebook away, and gave him that same cold, unreadable stare. Draven actually took a step backward without meaning to. Hollis jumped back in, his voice a little too loud, a little too shaky. "All right, let's move it, people. The wall climb is next. Brennan, try not to break a nail." As the platoon headed for the 12-foot wall, Master Sergeant Jackson quietly walked up beside Kate. "That ink," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The code on your arm. What's the story behind it?" For the very first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Kate's face, a hint of recognition. "That's not something I can discuss, Master Sergeant," she replied, her voice just as low. Jackson just gave a single, sharp nod. He was smart enough to drop it, but the pieces were clicking into place in his mind. Task Force 17. Operation Sandstorm. The ghost unit that was never officially on the books. The mission that rescued 40 hostages from deep behind enemy lines. And that eagle insignia? If that tattoo was real, then Corporal Brennan wasn't just another soldier. She was a living legend. Hollis, desperate to look like he was still in charge, went first, clambering over the wall with a lot of loud, show-off grunts. When it was Kate's turn, he made a big show of looking at his watch. "We'll give you the full 2 minutes, Brennan." "Don't rush." She started her climb, and from the ground, Jackson watched her every single move like a hawk. But something was seriously wrong. Jackson had seen Hollis fiddling with the wall earlier that morning. Just as Kate's hand reached for the last handhold at the very top, the entire piece ripped away from the wooden frame. With a sickening sound of screeching metal, she was suddenly dangling 12 feet over the hard-packed ground by one hand, swinging like a pendulum. The whole platoon gasped. But Kate didn't scream, and she didn't fall. In a move that looked like it defied the laws of physics, her core muscles tightened like steel cables, and her free hand shot up, slapping the top of the wall. Her fingertips dug into the splintered wood with a grip that shouldn't have been possible. Then, with one explosive burst of pure power, she pulled herself over the top and landed on the other side with barely a whisper. You could have heard a feather drop in the silence that followed. Jackson knew right then that wasn't training. That was raw survival instinct, sharpened in the most dangerous places on Earth. Hollis was the first one to speak, his voice squeaking with panic. "See? Somebody must have messed with that to make her look like a hero." Kate walked back around the wall, her breathing still slow and even. She didn't say a word. She knew he did it, and he knew she knew. But Draven, being the moron he was, shoved his phone right up in her face. "Smile for the camera, you fake. This is going straight to the group chat." And he took 3 quick pictures, sealing his own fate. The pictures showed her tattoo, her face, and the broken handhold. Then he turned away, his thumbs flying over the screen. Less than 30 seconds later, the pictures were up in the unit's private chat. 18 people immediately hit the laughing emoji. The comments started pouring in. "Total poser. Tactical Barbie. That ink is so fake. Did her boyfriend draw it on with a Sharpie?" Brennan glanced down at her arm. The eagle stared back, its claws gripping a code that only a few people in the world would ever recognize. She pulled her sleeves back down, hiding it completely. Not because she was ashamed, but because it was part of her plan. Hollis was loud, Draven was sloppy, and loud, sloppy people make huge mistakes when they think they're winning. Have you ever been completely misjudged based on how you look? The training day wore on. A full tactical gear inspection was next, followed by a timed run carrying heavy ammo cans. Lieutenant Marcus Carver, the officer in charge of the training range, showed up around 9:45 to supervise the rest of the day. He was 30 with sharp, focused eyes, and he lived by the rulebook so strictly that he was either your best ally or your worst nightmare. Depending on which side of the regulations you were on, he was carrying a clipboard and had a zero-tolerance policy for any kind of safety violation. During the ammo can run, Hollis saw his chance. While Brennan was in the middle of her run, he pulled Lieutenant Carver aside over by the equipment shed. Jackson was a good 20 feet away, trying to get the climbing gear sorted, but he could still hear Sergeant Hollis poisoning the well. Bits and pieces of the conversation cut through the grunts and clanking of the training yard. "A serious safety violation, sir," Hollis insisted. She took off her gloves on the wall. "That's reckless endangerment." Lieutenant Carver's brow tightened. He glanced over at Brennan, who was just then lowering a 40-pound ammo can to the ground with perfect form, back straight, knees bent. Hollis, slick as ever, passed a folded paper to the lieutenant. It was a formal complaint, already dated and with Brennan's name typed neatly at the top. Carver's face was a mask as he read it. "You're making this official, Sergeant?" Hollis puffed out his chest. "Yes, sir. Rules are for everyone." Carver gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Understood. I'll handle it." As Hollis swaggered away, he shot a nasty, triumphant grin at Brennan, and Jackson felt his own hands clench into fists. Pulling a stunt like faking a safety violation wasn't just a low blow, it was a career killer. It triggered mandatory investigations, immediate suspension, and was a one-way ticket out of the Army if the higher-ups didn't like you. And Sergeant Hollis had just pointed that weapon at a soldier who wasn't even fighting back. The moment Hollis was out of earshot, Master Sergeant Jackson was in front of Lieutenant Carver. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" Carver looked up, his pen hovering over a clipboard. "Go ahead, Master Sergeant. I was the safety supervisor on that wall climb. Corporal Brennan never took her gloves off, not for a second. I'd stake my rank on it." Carver held his gaze for a long moment, sizing him up. "I hear you, but Hollis filed a written complaint. My hands are tied. I have to open an inquiry." "I understand that, sir. I just wanted to make sure my report was on the record, too." Carver's eyes drifted back to Brennan. She was now quietly coaching a new private on the right way to hold an ammo crate, her voice calm and encouraging. She looked like a natural leader, patient and professional, the complete opposite of someone who would recklessly endanger herself and her squad. "Your statement is noted, Master Sergeant." Jackson turned and walked away, his jaw tight. He'd done what he could, gone through the proper channels. Now it was all on Carver to choose between doing what was easy and doing what was right. The Georgia sun beat down on them. At 1100 hours, Carver finally called a 10-minute break. The soldiers scattered, seeking shade and gulping down water. Brennan found a quiet bench by herself near the gear racks and started to peel an orange with slow, careful precision. From across the yard, Jackson watched her. She wasn't fidgeting or checking her phone or looking for a sympathetic face. She was just existing in her own quiet space, eating that orange slice by perfect slice, her eyes fixed on something far away. Over by the bathrooms, Draven and his little crew were huddled together, laughing and staring at a phone. Jackson knew exactly what was going on. They were trashing her in the group chat, building their case against the quiet girl. Brennan, the suck-up. Brennan, the fake. Brennan, the girl who wouldn't fight back. But they missed the little detail. Her left hand, resting on her leg, was tapping a quiet, steady rhythm against her thigh. 4 taps, a pause. 4 taps, a pause. It was like a secret code she was sending to herself, a way to stay calm, or maybe something else entirely. At 11:15, Carver's voice echoed across the yard. "Brennan, my office! On the double!" The entire training area went silent. Everyone froze mid-stretch, mid-sip, mid-sentence. Brennan stood up, calmly brushed the orange peel from her hands, and started walking. Her pace was steady, almost casual. She stopped in front of the lieutenant and stood at parade rest, her hands clasped behind her back, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Carver held up Hollis's flimsy complaint. "Corporal Brennan, I have a formal report stating you violated safety protocols on the wall climb this morning. It says you removed your protective gloves. How do you respond to this allegation? The silence was so thick you could cut it. 35 pairs of eyes were glued to Brennan. Hollis stood off to the side, arms crossed, a smug smirk blooming on his face. Draven had his phone out, brazenly recording the whole thing. When Brennan finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried. I wore my gloves for the entire exercise, sir. Master Sergeant Jackson can confirm. Carver glanced at Jackson, who gave a sharp, definitive nod. Hollis immediately stepped forward, his voice loud and indignant. Sir, with all due respect, I was much closer. I saw her plain as day. She ditched the gloves halfway up the wall. Carver's eyes darted between the three of them. Hollis, red-faced and defensive. Brennan, perfectly still and calm. Jackson, solid and certain. It was a classic. He said, she said. And wouldn't you know it, the video from Draven's phone was too shaky and far away to make out any details about her hands. Corporal Brennan, until we sort this out, you're suspended from all training activities for the rest of the day. Report to the company office at 1300 hours to give a formal statement. Brennan's expression didn't change by a single flicker. Yes, sir. Dismissed. She turned on her heel and walked toward the gear shed to grab her things, leaving a sea of whispers behind her. Hollis shot a victorious look at Draven. Jackson's face was like granite as he watched Brennan gather her rucksack, a notebook, and a water bottle. She moved with a strange, methodical calm, as if being publicly humiliated was just another drill to be completed. But Jackson saw the subtle change in her breathing. It was controlled, a perfect 4x4 box breath. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4. Breathe out for 4, hold for 4. As she walked past Hollis, he leaned in and hissed, just loud enough for a few people to hear. I told you that you don't belong here. Go back to whatever sad little town you crawled out of. She stopped, turned her head just enough to lock eyes with him. And for the very first time that day, the corner of her mouth lifted into a tiny smile. It was a razor-sharp, freezing cold smile that held no warmth at all. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Hollis with a confused look on his face, like a man who'd just been handed a winning lottery ticket made of ice. Draven just laughed and slapped him on the back. Relax, man. Carver's gonna hang her out to dry. Hollis nodded, but he kept staring after Brennan's retreating figure. Jackson waited until most people had cleared out for lunch, then he took out his phone. He scrolled through a list of old contacts, numbers he hadn't called in years, until he found the right one. He pressed the call button. After 4 rings, a voice that sounded like it ate gravel for breakfast answered. Jackson, make it quick. I will. I need you to look up a name for me, completely off the books. Go. Corporal Kate Brennan. She's stationed at Fort Benning, arrived about 4 weeks back. What am I looking for? She has a tattoo. A Task Force 17 Eagle, and an Operation Sandstorm service code. The other end of the line went dead silent. After a few seconds, the voice came back, all business. Are you absolutely certain? I'm looking at her file photo right now. Dale, that unit does not officially exist. Tell me something I don't already know. There was another long pause. Give me 2 hours. I'll call you back. The line clicked dead. Jackson put his phone away and looked out over the empty training yard, where heat shimmered off the red Georgia clay. In the distance, another platoon was running drills, their sergeant's commands echoing faintly. On the surface, everything looked normal, but Jackson had a powerful feeling that normal was about to be canceled for the day. At 1300 hours, Brennan sat in a cold, gray office across from Lieutenant Carver. He was looking at her official service record on his computer, and the file was thin, suspiciously thin. It listed basic training, a school for office clerks, a comfortable logistics job in Germany, and then her transfer here. It was the most boring, forgettable record he had ever seen. Her file said she was nobody special, just another paper pusher. But Lieutenant Carver had seen her move. He'd seen her on the climbing wall, recovering from a slip with the instincts of a seasoned commando. There was nothing in her record that could explain her flawless technique, the ghost unit tattoo on her forearm, or the unnerving calm in her eyes. Corporal, Carver said, leaning back in his chair, your file says you move supplies? It says, "You've never been in a combat zone." "That's correct, sir," she answered, her voice even. "Then tell me about the tattoo," he pressed. Brennan's hands were folded neatly in her lap. "It's a personal matter, sir." "Personal how? A memorial?" "It's for someone I used to know." Carver's gaze hardened. "Someone you knew who had security clearance for a Task Force 17 emblem?" She met his stare without flinching. "I am not at liberty to discuss that, sir." "Are you not at liberty?" Carver pushed. "Or are you just refusing to?" "Both, sir." The air in the room felt heavy. Carver was trapped between two stories. On one hand, he had Sergeant Hollis's formal complaint, a career-ending accusation that Brennan was a fraud. On the other, he had Master Sergeant Jackson's gut feeling that something wasn't right. And right in front of him sat a corporal who moved like an elite operator, had the composure of a spy, and wore a tattoo that was supposed to be a myth. "Corporal Brennan, I'm going to be perfectly clear," Carver said. "If you're faking your record, you're done. If that tattoo is stolen valor, that's a federal crime. But if there's a secret part of your file that's been wiped clean, you have to give me something to go on. Anything at all. I need a name, Corporal. A contact. Something more than my Master Sergeant's hunch. Because right now, it's one NCO's word against yours. And his story says you're either a liar or incompetent. And I have nothing to prove he's wrong." Brennan just sat there in total silence for what felt like forever. 10 seconds, then 20. Carver waited. Finally, she reached into her pocket, pulled out a tiny, folded slip of paper, and pushed it across his desk. On it was a phone number and a single word written in crisp, block letters: Sandstorm. "Call that number, sir. Give them that word. They will give you the information you need." Carver picked it up. "And what if they don't?" he asked. Her reply was instant. "Then I'm everything Sergeant Hollis accused me of being." Carver stared into her eyes, searching for any hint of a lie. All he saw was steel. He carefully folded the paper and tucked it into his breast pocket. "You're dismissed, but stay close. I have a feeling we'll be talking again very soon." Brennan stood, delivered a perfect salute, spun on her heel, and walked out. Carver was left alone in the quiet office, staring at the door. He pulled out the slip of paper again, wondering what kind of trouble he was about to invite. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on the base. Brennan moved like a shadow through the crowds of soldiers heading to eat. She passed the noisy motor pool, a mess of rumbling engines and shouted commands. She was right there in the open, but it was like she was completely invisible. As she approached her building, she saw Draven and his buddies still hanging around, their faces lit up by their phones, completely unaware of the storm they had started. As Brennan came around the corner, Draven's voice sliced through the air. "Hey Brennan, I heard you got booted from the training squad. That's a tough break. Maybe next time, don't pretend to be something you're not." His friends laughed right along with him. But Brennan didn't even look at them. She just kept walking, her stride steady, her mind focused on a simple breathing pattern. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Draven's smirk disappeared. "Did she just ignore me?" he muttered as she walked away. They quickly forgot about her and went back to their phones. They couldn't see Brennan's hand brush against her forearm, right over the tattoo hidden by her sleeve. They had no idea that every insult, every picture they took, was being carefully recorded not by her, but by someone else. Do you believe one person can really take on a corrupt system? Let me know in the comments below. Someone watching from far away, with unlimited resources, incredible patience, and a memory that never failed. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Jackson's phone buzzed. He stepped away from his inspection in the vehicle bay to answer it. "This is Jackson." It was the same rough voice as before, but the tone was different. It was quiet and serious. "Listen, Dale, I did some checking on Kate Brennan. Born in 1996, joined up in 2015. On paper, she's an administrative clerk with a spotless record." "And off the record?" Jackson asked. There was a short pause. "Off the record, there's a gap. From 2019 to 2021. 24 months where she was supposedly at a base in Germany, but every single travel record, every access log, it's all been scrubbed or blacked out. And that ink you told me about," the voice continued, I described it to an old contact. The guy went pale. He told me if that tattoo is real, she's no paper pusher. She's connected to Tier 1 operations, could be intelligence, could be support. Heck, she could have been a frontline soldier. Whatever she was part of, it's buried so deep it would take a decade to dig up. A knot tightened in Jackson's stomach. Operation Sandstorm, he said, almost in a whisper. The voice on the other end got even quieter. I can't confirm that operation ever existed, Dale. Not on any official record. Anywhere. But I can tell you this. Anyone with that mark has either saved a whole lot of good people, or they know where a lot of bad people are buried. Maybe both. So what on earth is she doing here, pretending to be a clerk in a basic training unit? I have no idea, the voice confessed. But you should be asking a different question. What kind of person would choose to take a demotion, hide their real skills, and let a loudmouth like Hollis walk all over them? She's either running from something really powerful or she's hunting something specific. And my money is on hunting. The call ended with a click. Jackson just stood there, the phone still to his ear, his mind racing, hunting. Suddenly, it all made sense. Hollis wasn't just bullying her, he was panicking. He'd gone from making dumb jokes to filing fake reports in less than 3 hours. That wasn't just a jerk being a jerk. That was a cornered animal trying to take out a threat before it could expose him. It meant Hollis was hiding something big. Jackson shoved his phone in his pocket and practically ran to the company headquarters. He had to get to Carver before the lieutenant made a mistake that could end his career. He had to tell him who he was really dealing with. But when he burst into the office, it was empty. A sticky note on the desk just said Carver was at the command center making a call on a secure line. Jackson swore under his breath and turned to leave. Just then, he saw Brennan through the window, walking across the compound to her barracks, and about 20 yards behind her, Hollis and Draven were following her, holding up their phones and whispering to each other. Every single one of Jackson's combat instincts screamed at him. He stepped back outside, keeping all 3 of them in his sight. They weren't getting closer, just shadowing her, probably filming her, trying to invent more fake evidence for their phony complaints. This had gone way beyond simple bullying. This was a calculated, tactical operation. It was like watching a pair of hyenas stalk their prey. Brennan got to the door of her barracks and stopped. She turned around slowly, and her eyes locked onto Hollis from 30 yards away. She didn't yell or make a gesture, she just watched him. And in that single look, Jackson saw something he hadn't seen in a very long time. Something from his own time in the field. Patience. It was the terrifying kind of patience you have when you know, for a fact, that your enemy is about to make a stupid, fatal mistake, and all you have to do is wait for it to happen. As evening arrived, the base fell into its normal routine, the clatter of trays from the dining hall, the groaning of cooling engines, and the far-off shouts of instructors drilling late-night recruits. Brennan sat alone in the barracks common area with an open book in her lap, though her eyes hadn't moved from the page in over 10 minutes. Around her, soldiers were cheering at a football game, playing a loud card game, and just talking. She was completely invisible to them. At 7 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Training yard, 2100, come alone. She read the message one time, deleted it, carefully put a bookmark in her book, and stood up. Nobody even saw her leave. Imagine being backed into a corner by 4 guys trying to destroy your career, all because you stumbled upon a secret they'd kill to keep. That's the exact spot Corporal Brennan found herself in one night, and trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how she completely flips the script on them. The training yard was pitch black, except for the harsh glare of floodlights that made every shadow look like a monster. At 5 minutes past 8, Brennan walked in, hands stuffed in her pockets, looking like she didn't have a care in the world. Then, a figure stepped out from the darkness. It was Hollis, the ringleader of her problems, with his crony Draven right behind him. 2 more of his goons materialized near the climbing ropes. It was a trap. Glad you could make it, Hollis sneered. But Brennan could hear a slight tremor in his voice. He was nervous. She just stood there, about 15 feet away, letting her silence do all the talking. You're becoming a real headache, Hollis said, taking a slow step toward her, poking around in things that aren't your business. You're making people uncomfortable, and we just can't have that. Brennan didn't even blink. She just watched him approach, her calm completely unnerving him. That's when Draven stepped up, shoving a lit-up phone in her face. First, he showed her a few childish pictures from their private chat, but then he started swiping. He flew through a gallery of screenshots, inventory lists, serial numbers for high-tech gear, and shipping manifests. And right there, on two of those records, were their names in black and white, Hollis and Draven. "You're a clever girl, Brennan," Hollis hissed, his voice dropping to a low threat. "You've probably figured it all out. So here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, you're requesting a transfer. You're going to tell Captain Carver this life isn't for you, and then you're going to disappear." Brennan's gaze shifted from the phone screen to Hollis's smug face, but she still said nothing. "Or," Hollis continued, his voice turning into a menacing growl, "we can flood Carver's office with so many signed complaints and incident reports about you that you don't just get transferred, you get a dishonorable discharge that will haunt you forever." The two guys by the ropes started to move, fanning out to cut off any chance of escape. It was 4 against 1 in the dead of night, with no witnesses. Brennan took a single, steadying breath. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Then, in a voice that was quiet but cut through the air like a knife, she gave her answer. "No." Hollis looked genuinely shocked. "What did you say?" "No," she repeated, her voice as solid as granite. "I'm not transferring. I'm not going anywhere. And you're going to need more than fake reports and a couple of lame photos to get rid of me." Draven let out a nervous laugh. "Do you really think you're some kind of movie hero?" he scoffed. "You think that silly tattoo of yours is going to scare us off?" Brennan's eyes locked onto him, and the temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. "It's not for show." Draven's smirk faltered. "Oh yeah? Prove it." A tiny, chilling smile touched Brennan's lips. "I am." That's when Hollis lost it. He lunged forward, getting so close she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Oh, yes," Brennan replied, her voice a near whisper. "I do." The challenge hung in the air between them. In the distance, a truck horn blared, a sound from another world. Here, time was standing still. Hollis looked like he was about to do something stupid, his hand twitching, but he caught himself. He knew that throwing the first punch was a line he couldn't uncross. "You are making a colossal mistake, Brennan," he seethed. Her response was simple and devastating. "We'll see." Utterly defeated, Hollis finally backed down, waving for his crew to follow him. They melted back into the shadows they came from, leaving Brennan alone in the stark, white light. As they vanished, Draven risked one last glance over his shoulder, his face a perfect picture of confusion and a healthy dose of fear. The second they were gone, Brennan let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Her hands, which had been relaxed by her sides, finally unclenched. She had been ready for them to attack, ready to defend herself with brutal efficiency, and ready to end their little criminal enterprise right then and there. But them walking away was even better. They were still gathering all the evidence she needed, one arrogant mistake at a time. She took a long, winding path back to her barracks, one she knew had no camera coverage. Sitting on her bunk, she pulled out a simple green notebook and wrote down everything. Names, times, and their exact quotes from the meeting. She snapped a quick, clear photo of the page and sent it to a contact in her phone, saved only as a single period. Not even 30 seconds passed before a reply came back. "Acknowledged. Proceed." She immediately deleted the message, the reply, and the photo from her phone, then tucked the notebook away. Tomorrow was just another day in this quiet little war, and another opportunity for Hollis to dig his own grave just a little bit deeper. And he would. People who think they're untouchable always get sloppy. Breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4, breathe out for 4. Across the base, Lieutenant Carver sat in his parked car, staring at a phone number Corporal Brennan had given him. He'd just come from a 2-hour classified meeting that made his head spin. Now, he was about to bet his entire career on one of his soldiers by making a single phone call. He tapped the screen. The phone rang 3 times before a crisp, professional voice answered. "This is Lieutenant Marcus Carver, Fort Benning," he said, his voice steady. "I was given this number by Corporal Kate Brennan. The password is sandstorm. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. 5 seconds stretched into what felt like 5 minutes. Finally, a voice said, "Stand by." The line didn't go dead, but all sound disappeared. Carver waited for 90 agonizing seconds, his heart pounding in his chest. Suddenly, a new voice came on the line, deep, powerful, and radiating authority. "Lieutenant Carver, you have 30 seconds. State your purpose." Carver's throat was dry, but he forced the words out. "Sir, one of my soldiers gave me this number. She's facing a pile of accusations that just don't add up with her record. I need to know if there's more to her story, something I'm not cleared to see. Her name is Corporal Kate Brennan." The pause was shorter this time. "Her file is 100% accurate as it is written. That is all the information you require, Lieutenant." "With all due respect, sir, that's not going to cut it. I have sergeants filing reports that are tearing my unit apart, and there's the question of a tattoo that needs to be verified." "The ink is authorized," the voice stated flatly. "Everything else is on a need-to-know basis, and you do not need to know. What you times need times to do, Lieutenant, is ensure Corporal Brennan is protected from any and all harassment so she can complete her assignment. Is that understood?" "Her assignment? Sir, am I stuttering?" Lieutenant Carver swallowed hard. "No, sir." "Good. This number is no longer in service. Do not attempt to call it again." The line went dead. Carver just sat there in the dark, the phone still pressed against his ear as all the puzzle pieces crashed into place. Protected, assignment, authorized. Brennan wasn't just some corporal caught in a bind. She was a goddamn operator. And Sergeant Hollis had just picked a fight with a loaded gun, not even realizing he'd put the barrel to his own head. Carver fired up his engine and drove straight for the office. It was time to file a few official reports of his own, the kind that would put Sergeant Hollis under a microscope he couldn't handle. The next day was going to be interesting. Miles away, Brennan slept soundly, her breathing even and slow. Underneath her sleeves, the eagle tattoo on her forearm seemed to keep watch in the darkness, its talons clutching a set of coordinates, a map that led straight to justice. The clock ticked past midnight. A deep quiet settled over the base. But it was the kind of silence that comes right before a storm. Something big was coming. By 7 in the morning, the tension on the training field was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Rumors were flying everywhere. Brennan was suspended, Hollis was pressing charges, Carver was on the warpath. The gears of the military machine were turning, and everyone could feel the ground shaking. Brennan was supposed to be on desk duty, but when her friend Jackson arrived at 7:15, he saw her sitting on a bench, gear packed, looking perfectly calm. And in that moment, he understood. She wasn't just showing up to be defiant. She had been sent. A quiet takedown was in motion, and it just goes to show you, never, ever underestimate the quiet ones, because they're the ones who are truly dangerous. Hollis saw her the second she stepped onto the training grounds the next morning. All the arrogance he'd shown the day before was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made his eyes dart around. He huddled up with Draven by the equipment shed, the two of them whispering and checking their phones like they were expecting an emergency evacuation. Jackson found a good spot to watch the drama unfold, his notepad ready. He could feel it in the air, the fuse had been lit, and the bomb was about to go off. At 07:30, Lieutenant Carver walked out of the company building, but he wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 military police officers. A heavy silence instantly fell over the yard. Soldiers who had been laughing and stretching a second ago were now frozen in place. MPs on the training grounds could only mean one thing: someone's career was about to end. Carver's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Everybody up! Formation! Let's go!" 35 soldiers scrambled to form lines, the sound of their boots kicking up dust like a nervous heartbeat. Brennan got up from her bench to fall in, but Carver stopped her with a raised hand. "Corporal Brennan, you stay right there." She paused, then simply returned to the bench and sat down, her hands resting calmly in her lap. From all the way across the yard, Jackson could see the slow, even rhythm of her breathing, that 4-count combat breath. She wasn't a part of the storm. She was the calm at the center of it. Hollis stood stiff as a board in the formation, His jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. His eyes flickered nervously between Carver and the MPs. Next to him, Draven looked like he was about to be sick, his hand clutching the phone in his pocket as if it could save him. The two soldiers who'd thrown in with Hollis were suddenly trying their best to disappear into the background. Lieutenant Carver strode to the middle of the formation, his hands clasped tightly behind him. His voice was calm when he spoke, but it carried an edge that could cut glass. Yesterday, a formal complaint was lodged concerning Corporal Brennan's performance in a training drill. That complaint has been fully investigated. What I'm doing now is not exactly by the book, but given the situation and by a direct command from higher up, it's necessary. He let the words hang in the silence. Master Sergeant Jackson, get up here. Jackson moved forward. His walk as solid and sure as a man who'd seen it all and wasn't impressed by any of it. He clicked his heels and stood at attention beside Carver, waiting. Master Sergeant, you were the supervising officer for yesterday's wall climb. Your verbal account didn't match Sergeant Hollis's written report. I need you to state, for the record and in front of everyone, what you saw. Jackson's voice boomed across the training yard. Sir, I had my eyes on Corporal Brennan for the duration of the climb. She was wearing standard issue gloves the entire time. The gear failed. She didn't. Her self-rescue was perfect. She followed every safety protocol to the letter. A low rumble of whispers spread through the ranks. Hollis's face went grim, but he was smart enough not to say a word. Carver gave a single, sharp nod. Understood. Thank you, Master Sergeant. His gaze then shifted to Brennan. Corporal Brennan, on your feet. She stood up, hoisted her pack onto her shoulder, and walked to the front as every single soldier tracked her every move. She halted in front of Carver and stood at attention, her face a complete mystery. Carver watched her for a long second, and in that quiet moment, Jackson saw something pass between them, a silent understanding, like the final piece of a puzzle snapping into place. Corporal, I am about to give you a direct order. You will follow it precisely. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Roll up your sleeves, both of them, all the way up. You could have heard a cricket cough. Brennan started with her right sleeve. She undid the button at the cuff and slowly pushed the material up, past her wrist, over a toned forearm and bicep, until it bunched at her shoulder. There was nothing there but tanned skin, lean muscle, and a couple of faint scars from old drills. Then she moved to her left arm. She rolled this sleeve up even slower, milking the moment, because they all knew this was the one they'd been talking about. The tattoo began to appear from under the fabric, bit by bit. First came the talons, the black ink, a sharp contrast on her skin. Then the eagle's body, its wings unfurling as the sleeve climbed higher. And finally, the entire piece was revealed in the bright morning sun. It was an eagle, its eyes fixed forward with fierce intensity. Below it, a unit designation, TF-17, 2K-19. And under that, 2 words, Op Sandstorm. Jackson heard at least a dozen soldiers gasp. He could see others craning their necks, trying to make out the words. Hollis physically stumbled backward like he'd been punched, bumping right into the man behind him. Draven's phone dropped from his suddenly numb hands and clattered on the asphalt. Carver stepped in, looking at the tattoo with a detached, professional curiosity. Master Sergeant Jackson, you spent 6 years with JSOC. Do you recognize that insignia? Jackson's throat felt dry, but his voice came out like gravel. Yes, sir. That is the official mark of Task Force 17. That specific eagle is unique to their maritime counterterrorism unit. And that operation code, that was a classified mission back in 2019. I'd only seen that symbol one other time, in a top secret briefing I was never supposed to have seen. Now, can some random person just go get this tattoo? Not a chance. That exact design is a federally registered mark. To wear it without earning it is a serious federal offense. But to have it, and be able to prove it's real, he struggled for a moment to find the right words. It means she's operated in places that don't show up on any map, on missions that will never be mentioned in any official report. A quiet shockwave of disbelief rippled through the soldiers. This wasn't some campfire story. This wasn't some rookie trying to act tough with a fake backstory. This was real. And in that instant, for every single person who had snickered, pointed, and shared her photo, the solid ground they were standing on just dropped out from under them. But Carver wasn't done yet. He addressed Brennan again. Corporal, your official file says you're in administrative support. You push paper. There isn't one mention of you ever being in a combat zone. How do you explain this? He motioned toward the tattoo. Brennan's reply was soft, but it cut through the yard's dead silence like a knife. Sir, everything in my service record is 100% accurate, but the things that aren't in my record are also 100% true. What on earth did that mean? It means some assignments are never officially recorded. Carver nodded slowly, like this was the very answer he was expecting. Do you have any proof on you, besides that tattoo? An ID card? Some kind of documentation? Without saying a word, Brennan reached into the collar of her uniform and pulled out her dog tags. Just 2 plain metal plates on a chain. They looked perfectly normal at first glance. She lifted the chain over her head and passed them to Carver. He angled them in the sunlight, reading the stamped information out loud. Brennan, Kate, serial number B4471, TF17. He froze, his eyes going wide. Master Sergeant, is this serial number format standard issue? Jackson moved in, glanced at the tags, and felt his own heart hammer against his ribs. No, sir. A standard Army serial would never have a unit designation stamped into it like that. That format is reserved exclusively for operators whose service history is completely blacked out. It's an offline way to verify she is exactly who that tattoo claims she is. Carver handed the tags back to Brennan, who slipped them over her head and tucked them away. He then took a military-grade tablet from an MP standing nearby, tapped the screen a couple of times, and angled it so the entire formation could see. This is a classified database. I was given a one-time access code this morning by an officer whose name I am not at liberty to share. He typed in Brennan's serial number. The screen blinked, and a file popped up. Huge black bars redacted most of it. Dates, locations, mission details, but some things were left visible. There was a photo of a much younger Brennan in full tactical gear, a long list of awards and medals, all of them classified. And at the very bottom, one single chilling line. Status, active, special assignment phase 2. This time, you could hear the shaky breaths being drawn in all around the yard. From the back, someone muttered, "Oh my God." Carver switched off the tablet and handed it back. When he faced his soldiers again, his whole presence had changed. This was no longer a lieutenant addressing his subordinates. This was a junior officer in the presence of someone who operated in a world he could only dream of, Corporal Brennan. His voice was suddenly sharp, formal, and dripping with respect. On behalf of every single soldier here, I want to offer my deepest apologies for the way you've been treated. All complaints against you are hereby dismissed. Your conduct has been exemplary. Then, in a move that made even Master Sergeant Jackson's jaw hang open, Carver snapped to attention and delivered a flawless, razor-sharp salute. A shock wave went through the formation as 35 soldiers rushed to copy him, their arms shooting up in a messy but sincere show of respect. The salute rippled through the ranks like a shock wave, even reaching the smirking cronies who had been backing Hollis. They snapped their hands up because they had to, because the cold, hard fact of her authority had just bulldozed their little world of prejudice. Brennan returned the gesture with a single, sharp motion and dropped her hand. She kept her expression blank, but Jackson caught the faintest release of tension around her eyes. Nothing feels better than being proven right. Carver lowered his own salute, his eyes locking onto Hollis. Sergeant Hollis, step forward. The man was a statue. His boots might as well have been nailed to the ground as his expression shifted from disbelief to rage, before finally settling on pure, gut-wrenching panic. Draven had to physically shove him forward to get him to move. Sergeant Hollis, you submitted a fake safety report. You orchestrated a campaign of harassment against another soldier, and our initial review suggests you might be tangled up in things a lot more serious than bullying. Carver gave a subtle nod to the military police. You are confined to your quarters until a formal investigation is complete. Hand over your phone, your ID, and any personal electronics. Now, sir, Hollis's voice was thin and brittle. This is just a big misunderstanding. I was just trying to maintain standards. By faking official paperwork, by running a targeted harassment operation, by making off-the-books threats on the training field at 9 p.m. last night, Hollis's jaw snapped shut. His terrified eyes darted over to Brennan, who just met his gaze with that same unnerving, patient calm. He had been so sure she was an easy target, a quiet loner with no one in her corner. It never crossed his mind that every single word, every threat he'd ever made, had been monitored, documented, and sent straight up a chain of command he didn't even realize she was on. One of the MPs stepped up. "Sergeant, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. It's up to you." All the fight went out of Hollis at once. He sagged, pulling out his phone and his wallet, surrendering everything like a defeated man. As the MP bagged the items for evidence, Hollis made one last, desperate plea. "She's setting me up! This is all a setup. She was sent here to frame me." Carver's expression was carved from stone. "Keep talking, Sergeant. You're just making the investigator's job that much easier." As the MPs marched him away, Draven was still in the formation, trembling as he watched his boss get escorted toward the station. The other soldiers were staring at their boots, at the clouds, anywhere but at each other. The shame of what they'd done or let happen, coating them like a layer of filth. Carver's voice cut through the silence again. "Corporal Draven, front and center." Draven walked forward on shaky legs. Standing in front of the lieutenant, he looked like a man watching his life burn down in real time. "Corporal, you've got a very important choice to make right now. You took part in the harassment. You illegally shared images of a fellow soldier. You were there for an unauthorized confrontation that broke a dozen regulations. But you weren't the one in charge." Carver's voice softened just a fraction. "So, I'm going to ask you this once, and your entire career in this army hangs on how you answer. Are you involved in anything more than just harassment? Anything to do with base equipment, inventory fraud, or unlisted transfers?" Draven looked like a landed fish, his mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. Sweat was beading on his forehead, even in the cool morning air. He shot a desperate look at Brennan, who gave him nothing back, just a blank stare. Finally, in a voice that was barely a whisper, he choked out, "I think I need a lawyer." Carver heaved a long, tired sigh. "Take him away." The second MP moved in. Draven didn't put up a fight as they took his electronics and led him off in the same direction as Hollis. 2 down. The rest of the soldiers stood in a state of shock, thick fear hanging in the air. Jackson stepped up beside Carver. "Sir, what in the world is going on?" Carver scanned the remaining men. "It's bigger than we imagined. Criminal Investigation Division has been tracking stolen high-end gear for 6 months. We're talking night vision goggles, advanced armor, weapon scopes, little thefts here and there, but they added up. The trail went dead right here with this unit. They knew they had an inside man, but they couldn't figure out who." He glanced over at Brennan. "So, they sent in a specialist. Someone who could fit in, read the room, and draw out the bad guys by making herself look like a weak target." And Hollis took the bait, Jackson realized. Oh, Hollis didn't just take the bait. He swallowed the hook, line, and sinker. Jackson looked over at Brennan, who was now sitting on a bench, calmly rolling her sleeves back down to hide the tattoo that had just blown up the entire social hierarchy of the base. "How much of this was her plan?" he asked. "Every single piece of it, Master Sergeant. Every insult she took, every stupid test they gave her, every moment of humiliation, it was all a calculated play to make Hollis and his crew feel untouchable and get careless. And it worked like a charm. We have all their chat logs, their bank records, and footage from hidden cameras. The moment he cornered her for that private threat last night, he handed us all the probable cause we needed for search warrants." Carver checked his watch. "Warrants that are being executed all over this base as we speak." Right on cue, Jackson's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, read the message, and his eyebrows shot up. CID had just hit the logistics warehouse. They found 12 sets of night vision units hidden inside a shipping container that didn't officially exist. Carver's jaw clenched. 12 units. That's over $100,000 worth of gear. This wasn't just some soldier stealing supplies. This was a professional smuggling ring. The formation was dismissed, but with a clear order. No one was leaving the base. Every single person was now a person of interest. Soldiers broke off into nervous little groups, pulling out their phones the second they thought they were clear. The same group chat that had been tearing Brennan apart yesterday was probably now melting down with pure panic. Master Sergeant Jackson saw Brennan calmly zipping up her bag, every motion deliberate and calm. "Corporal." She looked up. "Master Sergeant." It was both incredible and a little terrifying to watch her. A tiny smile played on her lips. "Thank you. How long did you know about the smuggling?" "Since my second week here." Hollis was moving the stolen equipment through a friend of his, a civilian who runs one of those army surplus stores just off base. Draven was the computer guy, erasing the gear from the digital inventory. A few other guys in our platoon were lookouts and muscle. She shrugged. They were a small operation, but they were clever. "And you just let them bully you for 4 weeks because? Because when people get a high from picking on someone, they get comfortable. They start thinking they're untouchable. And comfortable people get sloppy. They make mistakes." She slung her bag over her shoulder. "I needed them to get arrogant and careless, and they delivered." Jackson just slowly shook his head, a mix of sheer admiration and total disbelief on his face. "You've got ice water in your veins, Corporal." "Patience is a virtue, Master Sergeant. It's not the same thing." Before he could say anything else, a sharp voice cut through the nervous buzz of the soldiers. "Brennan, my office. Now." It was Lieutenant Carver. She gave Jackson a quick nod and walked toward the company headquarters, leaving him there to watch her go. He replayed the past month in his mind, this quiet soldier, just absorbing insults and threats like she was made of armor. She never cracked, never fought back. She just waited for the exact right moment to pull the trigger and remind everyone who was really in control. That's a level of strength you can't learn in boot camp. That kind is forged in fire. Inside the office, the lieutenant shut the door and pointed to a chair. Brennan sat down, looking relaxed, but with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Carver sat behind his desk and folded his hands. "I have to ask, Corporal, and this is completely off the record. Why didn't you just show me your credentials on day one? Why did you let them put you through all of that?" Brennan paused for a second, choosing her words carefully. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and steady, but it seemed to hold a power that filled the entire room. "Because predators only show you who they really are when they think their prey is helpless. I let them see me as weak. I used their disrespect against them. Hollis wasn't just some bully with a big mouth, sir. He was the key to a smuggling ring that's been draining this base for months. If I came in here and announced I was an investigator, he would have clammed up, hidden the evidence, and probably disappeared. I needed him to be arrogant. I needed him to get sloppy." She leaned forward just a little, her eyes locked on his. 6 weeks of their little jokes gave me every name, phone record, and confession I needed, and they had no clue they were handing it all to me. That tattoo wasn't just bait, Lieutenant. It was the whole trap. Hollis couldn't help himself. He had to go after what he thought was a lie, a simple case of stolen valor. But every time he opened his mouth to mock me, every picture Draven posted online to make fun of me, every ridiculous complaint he filed, it was just another piece of evidence for my case. It built a perfect, documented timeline of his harassment, proved his character, and established a pattern of behavior that gave the Criminal Investigations Division more than enough probable cause to move in. Carver just listened, completely captivated. "I didn't lose my dignity, sir. I used it. Every time Hollis tried to put me down, I wrote it down. Every mocking photo Draven shared went directly into my file. Every threat, every confrontation, it all helped me build a case that is completely unbreakable. And as of this morning, 40 stolen night vision goggles have been recovered. 9 smugglers are in custody. Their entire network has been brought down, and this unit is finally clean." She leaned back, her hands resting on her knees. "You asked why I stayed quiet. Because real justice isn't about being the loudest person in the room, sir. It's patient. It's about letting the guilty hang themselves with their own arrogance and then striking with absolute precision." Her voice softened, but it held its steely edge. True strength isn't about making a scene. It's about having the self-control to do what's right, even when no one's around to praise you for it. I kept my mouth shut so that the bad guys would get comfortable and start talking. And believe me, they talked. The office was still, the only noise, the low hum of the AC. Carver let the full weight of her strategy sink in. This was never about a harassment complaint. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Brennan had deliberately made herself a target, absorbed all their venom, and weaponized it against them. She had played the part of a broken soldier to perfection, not a single detail out of place. Carver tried to find the right words. That was beyond anything I could have ever expected. You wanted the unvarnished truth, Lieutenant. And you delivered, he admitted. He opened a desk drawer, pulling out a folder and sliding it across the gleaming wood. This came in from CID. They want you for a full debrief at 1400 hours. They're asking for a complete breakdown, every observation, a minute-by-minute timeline, and your official recommendations on how to seal this loophole for good. Brennan took the file, her gaze sweeping over the cover. Understood. Just one last thing. Carver's face hardened. Your handler wanted me to pass on a message. The second this debrief is done and you've given your testimony for the court-martial, you're on a new assignment, a new target, this time on home soil. A sharp glint of focus lit up in her eyes. Phase 2. That name seems to ring a bell for you. It means this is far from over. This whole story is a huge lesson in how patience can be your greatest weapon. If you believe that quiet strength and true justice always win, share this story so it can inspire others. And make sure you stick around, because her story is just getting started. Carver stood, walked around his desk, and offered his hand. Brennan rose to meet him, taking it. The handshake was solid, a gesture between professionals. For what it's worth, Corporal, you have my deepest respect. What you pulled off took a kind of courage and smarts you just don't see every day. I'm truly sorry you had to go through all that to get the job done. It was a necessary evil, sir, and it got results. She let go of his hand, grabbed the file, and turned toward the door. Just as her hand touched the cold metal of the knob, Carver said her name one last time. Brennan. She paused, glancing back over her shoulder. That line you used about justice being patient, I think I might borrow that. For the first time, a real, genuine smile touched her lips. It's all yours, Lieutenant. The door clicked shut, leaving him all alone in the quiet office. He collapsed back into his chair, staring at the empty seat across from him, going over every word she had said. All over the base, the gears of military justice were starting to turn with a vengeance. Hollis was about to get slammed with a court-martial for stealing government property, fraud, and conspiracy. Draven was almost guaranteed to cut a deal to save his own skin. The rest of their little gang would be in cuffs before sundown. And Brennan, she was already moving on to the next mission, the next target, the next bunch of thugs who would make the same fatal mistake of underestimating the quiet girl in the room. The payback was already in full swing. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within the hour, Hollis and Draven were officially charged and locked up in the base brig, waiting for their trial. Their phones and laptops were confiscated, and it took the cyber team less than 60 minutes to crack their passwords and find everything. Texts, bank transfers, and damning messages with the owner of that shady surplus store off base. By noon, the civilian was in federal custody, and his entire shop was being torn apart by federal agents looking for evidence. Then, the personal humiliation began. Hollis was immediately busted down in rank, his security clearance was gone, and his military career was officially toast. His family was informed. His name would be linked to this disgrace forever. Draven, seeing how bad things were, decided to sing like a canary and spent the rest of the day in an interrogation room, spilling every single secret he knew to try and get a lighter sentence. The two other soldiers who played muscle for Hollis were easily spotted on security footage. When they were pulled in for questioning, they swore they had no idea about any smuggling, claiming they were just following Hollis's orders to mess with Brennan. Whether that was the full story or not would come out in the wash, but their careers were already permanently damaged just by being associated with him. The professional hammer came down on the entire unit like a ton of bricks. By 1500 hours, the battalion commander had ordered a full, top-to-bottom inspection of all sensitive gear. Every training exercise was put on hold for 48 hours while investigators grilled every last person in the company. A whole new set of rules was rolled out. Mandatory annual ethics courses, much tighter inventory checks, and a new anonymous hotline for reporting bad behavior. The message from the top was loud and clear. There was a sickness in this unit, and it was finally time to cut it out. The consequences crashed over the base like a tidal wave. Every soldier who had ever laughed at Brennan, shared that picture of her tattoo, or made a joke at her expense was dragged into a very uncomfortable meeting with their superiors. They got a long lecture about respect, teamwork, and what it means to be a professional. While most didn't get formally punished, every one of their names was put on a special watch list. In a single afternoon, their judgment was officially labeled as questionable. And in the armed forces, where your reputation is everything, that's a black mark that never really disappears. That group chat Draven used to share the pictures, it was now official evidence. Exhibit A. Everyone who was in it was assigned mandatory counseling, and a good number of them were transferred to different bases just to break up the toxic environment for good. By 1700 hours, as the day started to cool down, only 2 people were left in the empty training area: Master Sergeant Jackson and Corporal Brennan. After they both gave their official statements, they were told they could leave. He found her sitting on the very same bench where they had tried to publicly shame her, her gaze locked on the obstacle wall she had supposedly failed. Thinking about giving that wall another try, he asked softly, sitting down next to her. "No," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm thinking about how many times I almost gave up. Week 3 was the lowest point. Hollis had pretty much turned everyone against me, making them think I was useless. I had no friends, no one to confide in, except my handler on a secure channel. Every single morning, it took everything I had to get out of bed and wear the mask of a failure." "But you didn't break," he said, knowing the answer. "No, because if I quit, they would have won," she answered. "And worse, that smuggling ring would still be active. More of our gear would go missing, our enemies would get their hands on it, and maybe some of our own people would pay the ultimate price because their night vision equipment was sold off to the highest bidder." She finally turned to look at him, their eyes meeting. "I couldn't live with that." Jackson nodded slowly, taking it all in. "You know, when I first saw that tattoo," he admitted, "I thought you were running from something." "I was hiding, Master Sergeant," she corrected him gently, "but not from my past. I was hiding right out in the open, just waiting for the predators to reveal themselves. And now, it's over. It's time to move on. There's always another mission, another target. Another group of loudmouths who assume the quiet girl in the back of the room is an easy target." A sharp, confident smile touched her lips. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my career proving every single one of them wrong." A comfortable silence settled between them as the sun began to set. Across the base, inside the CID building, investigators were building a mountain of evidence that was going to put several soldiers in prison for a long time. In a jail cell, Hollis was just staring at a concrete wall, thinking about every single one of his mistakes. In the battalion commander's office, new rules were being written, policies that would carry Brennan's invisible signature for years to come. And hundreds of miles away, in a secure, unmarked building, Brennan's handler closed her final case file and let himself have a small, satisfied smile. The undercover mission was a complete and total success. The agent had maintained her cover through extreme mental pressure. The entire smuggling operation was completely destroyed. They had recovered 96% of the stolen equipment, and it looked like they were going to get a 100% conviction rate. The handler shut the file, opened a new one, and started to map out the next phase. For 6 straight weeks, they treated her like the platoon's punching bag, the quiet girl they all figured was a total pushover. And they never let up. What they failed to realize was that the timid little corporal they got their kicks out of tormenting was actually a hunter in disguise, and they had just walked right into her trap. Have you ever wondered what happens when the person everyone ignores is secretly the one in complete control? Stick with me, and you're about to find out. At 1800 hours, Corporal Brennan walked into her barracks to find an envelope on her bed. Inside was a new set of orders, active in 72 hours. The destination was blacked out, the mission details were classified, but a handwritten note at the bottom said it all. Incredible work, Corporal. This next hunt is on a whole different level. Are you ready? She put the note away, flipped open her little green notebook to a clean page, and wrote 2 simple words at the top. Phase 2. Underneath that heading, she started writing. Every single insult had been a piece of intel, teaching her exactly how to push the buttons of men like them. Every act of harassment had been a deep dive into the mind of a bully, and the entire 6-week nightmare was solid proof that patience, when used as a weapon, was the deadliest tool she had. Outside, the base was quieting down for the evening. The usual sounds filled the cool air, soldiers getting in line for dinner, the buzz of lights from the barracks, the faint yelling of a drill sergeant in the distance. Everything seemed completely normal, but right below the surface, justice was moving quietly and efficiently, taking out the trash. Brennan snapped her notebook shut, leaned back against her bunk, and started the deep breathing exercises that had been her lifeline through 6 weeks of carefully orchestrated hell. To the crooked soldiers on base, she was a nobody, just a quiet corporal who kept to herself. They never gave her a second look, and that was their first mistake. What they didn't know is that the most dangerous person on the entire installation was the one they ignored every single day. Stick with me for the next minute, and you'll find out why the quiet ones are the ones you should fear the most. Her phone buzzed quietly. A text from Master Sergeant Jackson, one of the few good ones. Heard you're shipping out. Fancy one last drink? She smiled a little and typed back. Can't. Early morning. But thanks for always watching my back, Master Sergeant. His reply was instant. Anytime, Corporal. And hey, that ink on your arm isn't just for show. It's a promise. Good on you for keeping it. After reading his message, she erased the whole chat. No history, no attachments. Only the mission mattered. At 2100 hours, she logged into a secure channel and sent a short coded message. Job's done. All clowns are out of the circus. Ready for phase 2. She added one final sentence. Suggest using the same invisible man tactic at other problem spots. Your asset is good to go. The answer came back in less than 2 minutes. Copy that. New playbook is attached. Burn it after reading. You're live on Monday at 0600. This new network is smarter, faster. You're gonna need all your skills for this one. You still game? Brennan's fingers were a blur on the screen. 100%. I'm in. The reply was immediate. Good. Because this time, the guy you're after knows our methods inside and out. Stay frosty, Corporal. And don't forget, real justice doesn't shout. She knew the rest by heart, typing out the code that she lived by. I know, she typed. It whispers. She downloaded the encrypted file, reading it over and over until every detail was burned into her memory. Then she wiped it completely. The new mark was a logistics officer, a snake selling high-tech military gear to the highest bidder. This operation was trickier, deadlier, and run by someone who trusted no one. That meant Brennan had to become a ghost, the kind of person you'd look right through, right up until the moment she took you down. With the calm precision of a surgeon, she packed her bag. Uniforms, boots, a simple green notebook, and the dog tags that were the only proof of who she really was under all the layers. The very last thing she packed, wrapped carefully in a soft cloth, was a heavy, old challenge coin. The coin was smooth from being held for years, marked with a striking eagle on one side and a set of classified map coordinates on the other. It was a thank you gift from a Special Forces A-team she'd pulled out of a fire during a mission called Operation Sandstorm, a team that, on paper, never existed, on a mission that never took place. But their gratitude was very real, and it came in the form of a coin she'd never lose and a tattoo she'd never hide. She held its familiar weight for a moment, a solid reminder of her purpose, before stowing it away. By tomorrow, she'd be gone. She'd leave behind the few good people like Master Sergeant Jackson, the corrupt soldiers who saw her as nothing, and the smugglers who learned the hard way that the quietest person in the room is always the most dangerous. But the job wasn't over, because somewhere out there, another traitor was selling out their country and putting lives on the line for a payday. And Corporal Kate Brennan, patient, precise and unstoppable, would be there to make things right. The main lights in the barracks clicked off, plunging the hall into darkness. Further down, she could hear the easy laughter of other soldiers, completely unaware that a hunter was living right beside them. Brennan shut her eyes, her breathing falling into that steady 4-second rhythm. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4. Tomorrow was a new mission, a new enemy, and a much more dangerous game. But for tonight, for the first time in a while, she knew that justice was winning, and that was all that mattered. The view of our story pulls back from her, flying out of the barracks, soaring high above the quiet military base and into the deep, dark night sky, filled with cold, silent stars. And somewhere in that blackness, a secure signal blinked once. Phase 2 was a go, and every single person who thought they were so smart, who was so sure their dirty little secrets were safe, who believed no one could possibly be watching them, they were all about to get a painful education. Real justice doesn't shout, it whispers, and it was already inside their walls.